In the middle of nowhere is a farmhouse. Living there is a farmer, his wife, and their dog that was abandoned as a pup. But creepy stuff happens in the middle of nowhere, and it's up to Courage to save his new home. Hi, I'm Fox, any pronouns. And that's right, we're talking about Courage the Cowardly Dog, a powerhouse of animated children's horror from the late 90s to early aughts. This show is a classic. Plenty of millennials agree and hold this show in high esteem. However, it really doesn't feel like anyone gives it a deep dive like other early 2000s shows have gotten. And frankly, that's a shame. Courage deserves better. It deserves a roughly 20 to 40 minute video by a millennial on YouTube who's ready to get emotional over a decades-old cartoon they watched as a kid. Every few years I do a rewatch of Courage the Cowardly Dog. It started when I saw that the series, a favorite of my childhood, was on Netflix over a decade ago. I'd often leave it playing to fall asleep to. It reminded me of being 10, secretly staying up late and having the volume on the absolute lowest setting, sometimes even just muted while I watched a well-loved show I already knew by heart. It was the right comfort of childhood frights and macabre fun to lull me away from the plague of insomnia. Or at least fill those sleepless nights with spooky joy. Courage first appeared on the silver screen in 1996 on a show called What a Cartoon, after the first name change, but back before I went through a couple other confusing name changes. What a Cartoon was the showcase of different animated shorts on Cartoon Network. The purple-furred dog with a big heart and bigger scream would capture attention on his debut with the chicken from outer space. It's about a chicken from outer space that Courage defeats. It almost won an Academy Award, but was beat out by the Wallace and Gromit short A Close Shave. Which, okay, yeah, I get, but I'm always going to prefer watching Courage. Sorry, Wallace and Gromit. Afterwards, a full show was greenlit, which would start airing in November of 1999. It blended that line between horror and humor beautifully, and introduced a generation to a macabre absurdism they otherwise wouldn't have experienced, with dark and lovely animation, not afraid to experiment with different styles to add to that sense of unease and otherworldliness. The art direction of Courage really leans into that, building up that surreal and unsettling atmosphere with drawers that aren't uniform, windows that are strangely curved, even inserting real-life images to add an otherworldly effect. Bizarreness is not just up in front, but in those little details hiding in plain view, where your eyes can easily glance over them without consciously taking the strangeness in, but deep down, knowing something is not quite normal. There are images that terrify kids and stick with them well into adulthood. An ancient pharaoh in the fog, CGI waving in the wind. A young violinist's face contorting into a horrible visage via claymation. A floating ghostly head warning people to get out of their own home. There's also a Bigfoot food fight, bickering alien duck brothers, sand whales, and shady sentient bananas selling bad goods. There's plenty of goofy amongst the ghoulish. This is a kids' show after all. That being said, it's surprisingly not really watered down. John Dilworth, the creator of Courage, respects his audience while having some fun with things. Tropes are played around with, there are plenty of little gags, and even in the midst of comedy is plenty of twisted horror if you stop to think about it. Also, it's really fun to search the backgrounds trying to find his cartoon face, which will appear every so often. It's a cute detail. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, that creeping dread coiled right behind nostalgia, waiting, watching. It knows when to strike. You'll never truly be ready. You can only deal with the aftermath. And our second sponsor, Fantasy Flan. Buy 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 Fantasy Flan. I'm going to break this retrospective up into several parts. First, the best episodes. Second, of course, best antagonists. Third, its place in cartoon history. And finally, my miscellaneous ramblings. There are no bad episodes of Courage the Cowardly Dog. Yes, some are better than others, but the lowest I would rate the lesser episodes is a B, and those Bs are few and far between. This is just that good of a show. There are episodes with some issues. The episode Courage Meets the Mummy has Eustace and Muriel being the reincarnations of a pair of ancient Egyptians, and during the episode they do dress as such while under a spell to reenact their past lives, which is a little culturally insensitive. Unfortunately, very reminiscent of the cinematic history of having important Egyptian characters and figures, such as Cleopatra, played by white people. Also, I do not know if the episode Squatting Tiger Hidden Dog is offensive to Chinese culture or not. The evil magic empress does have green skin, However, her nephew has a normal skin tone. The backgrounds are beautiful, however, and really pay respect to the beauty of traditional Chinese culture. I just don't know how accurate it would be to modern Chinese culture, or modern back then. Speaking of skin tone, the Aboriginal Hawaiians did not need to be an unnatural shade of blue like that, and some depictions get way too close to caricature for comfort. But hey, let's get on to the good. The very good. It is legitimately hard for me to pick the best episodes. I tried to narrow it down to 5, then quickly laughed at my own folly. There are chilling episodes, hilarious episodes, poignant episodes, episodes that made me weep, episodes that stuck with me well into adulthood and I know will stick with me as long as I have memories. You have episodes done fully in rhyme with the villain in Freaky Fred. You have moments of true chilling atmosphere such as in Heads of Beef. There are episodes that deal with toxic family, with abusive relationships, episodes on depression, on climate change, episodes about loving yourself as you are. And of course, episodes about why you need to return your library books on time. I'm not going to talk about every single episode, even though I feasibly could. I'm not ready on my YouTube journey to do a 2-hour deep dive, however. But there are a lot of episodes that don't get talked about much, that deserve it. On the other hand, I can't just ignore the classics, they're classic for a reason. So let me just do a quick-ish overview of the most obvious choices for best episodes. The episodes everyone remembers and talks about are... Freaky Fred. Fred is a barber who speaks in unsettling rhyme, talking about how he can't help being
quite naughty
and shaving people. It's funny, it's absurd, it's unsettling, and I love that they made an allusion to a serial killer in a kid's cartoon. S-tier episode. King Ramses' Curse. Slab is stolen from a museum, the thieves are fucking killed, let's be real, and that's best case scenario for them. Eustace ends up with it, and doesn't want to give it back because he wants to sell it. King Ramses appears in the fog, he's absolutely terrifying. Everyone was scared of this episode and this guy. S-tier episode. The Mask. Also known as the queer episode. This is the one that deals with domestic violence, 2 women that just want to be with each other, and realizing not all dogs are bad just because you've been bit by a few. It's a gorgeous episode full of heart and hope and healing. S-tier. I cried. Last of the Star Makers. Beautiful, tragic, bittersweet. A space squid watches her lover sacrifice himself for her and their eggs. She lands on the farm, weak, unable to do much to protect her eggs. Courage and Muriel befriend her. Eustace calls the army for some sweet reward money. They quickly take her eggs and quarantine her off to do some experiments and other shady governmental nonsense. So it's up to Courage to save his new friend. Spoiler, she dies. But her eggs are fine at least. S-tier. I also cried during. The Tower of Doctors Lost. This is the one straight up about depression. A guy is incredibly depressed, cannot find any happiness even when he blackmails the government, and so he wants to make everyone as miserable as he is. So he shoots cannons out across nowhere, and everyone they strike becomes miserable, unmotivated, depressed. Even Muriel, the happiest character who's always optimistic or encouraging. But not Courage, because he had just eaten a bunch of Muriel's happy plums. Which I'm just realizing might be a play on happy pills. Either way, they keep him from being affected by the cannons. This episode is a great, simplified representation of depression that's easy for a kid to understand, even showing a light at the end of the dark tunnel you might find yourself in. Absolutely S-tier. I did not cry, it was close. The other episodes that I've seen discussed are the 2 segments of the very final episode, Remembrance of Courage Past and Perfect. But I want to save these 2 for later because they deserve a more in-depth look. For now, lesser discussed best episodes. I have a very soft spot for the Duck Brothers, both the episode and these 2 disaster ducks. They're a pair of alien duck brothers who come to Earth and abduct Muriel to use her to break into a government facility. It's got more laughs than chills, but still a deliciously dark vibe. But what really is at the heart of the episode is these 2 duck brothers, one of whom keeps laying eggs while the other admonishes him for it because, as boy ducks, he doesn't think it's something they should be doing. Yeah, this episode has a lot of trans-mask vibes, which I love. Also, there's our Rock'em Sock'em style fight with the mind-controlled Eustace and Muriel. 10 out of 10. Everyone Wants to Direct always stuck in my mind. The villain is creepy, he's confirmed as having killed 12 actual people, holy shit. And his name is a play on Tarantino. Also, the way he's defeated is so fucking funny. Best villain takedown, 10 out of 10. Heads of Beef is another favorite because the atmosphere is top-notch, and I love when a show has an episode featuring cannibalism, or at least hinting at it. Well, maybe it's not cannibalism since the cook is a literal pig, but that's just semantics. Still, this episode is so dark and chilling, and frankly the twist doesn't deflate the previous fear. Cabaret Courage is another fantastic episode that deserves more recognition for how unsettling it is. The creature in the wall is a terrible yet fascinating sight. He forces everyone to perform for their desires of fame or money, but Courage just wants to save his family. It's a commentary on the callousness of showbiz, of selling yourself out for the glamour of the spotlight, and has some fun body horror. A lot of body horror. 10 out of 10. And of course, I have to bring up the best villain team-up episode, Ball of Revenge. Eustace gets mad that Muriel made a nice blanket for Courage, so he gets together a bunch of old villains who hate him, including the woman who tried to seduce and eat Eustace, to destroy Courage once and for all. Eustace even lets them threaten Muriel's life. You know, his loving wife, all to get revenge on his dog. And this episode isn't chilling or unnerving or full of surrealist mindfucks like many of the others, but damn is it just a lot of fun. Also,
this is one of those naughty men's clubs, isn't it?
It's a hilarious line that lives rent-free in my mind. I could go on and talk about basically every other episode. I'll spare you, though. I do want to go back and touch on the very last two segments of Courage ever. Remembrance of Courage Past and Perfect. The opening narration says that Courage was abandoned as a pup. In this episode, we see the truth. And it's really fucking sad. Courage had a loving mother and father dog who took him to the vet. The vet who ended up abducting them and sending them to space with no hope of returning. Courage barely manages to escape, but he's just a puppy all alone. That's when Muriel finds him and adopts him, and we really understand why Courage will always go to the greatest lengths to protect his family. This episode also portrays PTSD. Courage sees a photo of a missing dog and suddenly he's reliving the memories of what happened with his parents. He can't function, he's just stuck in the past, not really aware what's going on around him. It's pretty upsetting. I cried a lot during this one. Now let's talk about the very last Courage. It starts with Eustace mad because Courage keeps messing up, berating him for not being perfect. Later, Courage is making baklava with Muriel, and though she's encouraging when Courage can't get the dough right, and breaks the table with a hammer, he's still upset at himself. And then a woman appears, a teacher who calls him a disgrace. She keeps harassing Courage and demanding he be better. Courage, of course, is unable to appease her in anything he does, which only weighs further on him. He even dreams this terrifying thing that tells him he's not perfect.
You're not perfect.
He has several nightmares, actually, showing just how much this is affecting him, how awful he's been made to feel about himself. Everything changes when he's brushing his teeth and the dead fish they were using for baklava speaks to him, telling him that perfection isn't real and his imperfections aren't bad. A simple, not very long scene at all, the regardless is so touching, so important to hear. In fact, it's what pushes Courage to love himself, flaws and all, and destroy the perfection teacher. These two segments were the best ending the show could have had. It's not often that you can get to say that about a cartoon. That this end was a perfect encompassment of the show itself. That it was a fantastic send-off that respected the show with just enough grandness to really feel like a series finale, and not just any random episode that could have been placed anywhere in the airing. While of course I would have loved 100 more quality episodes of Courage, what we got was so good, and still holds up roughly 25 years later, and feels like we got a proper end to. And this show deserves to be remembered as one of the best of its era, with one of the best kids' cartoons with a more horror feel. With that, let's talk about the best antagonists. I love them all, so this is equally as daunting as choosing the best episodes. There are obvious choices, of course. Looking at you, Cats. Cats is a feline-type guy, sometimes clothed but usually naked, keeps giant spiders as pets, and in a whopping 5 episodes, more than any other recurring villain. Except maybe the government guys. He's certainly more devious than them, however. He also appeared in the crossover movie with Scooby-Doo, but I'm not really going to talk on that. Katz is a bit of an entrepreneur, going from having his own hotel to candy business to being the captain of a submarine he's planning on blowing up with innocent passengers on board. Including Muriel and Courage, of course. Katz is delightfully sadistic and cool, and it's no wonder he's such an iconic and beloved villain. Okay, I know I need to at least mention the other iconic villains everyone remembers. Ramses freaked everyone else out, and yeah, he's freaky, but I never thought he was that scary. I like him, though. But also, he's not a villain, he's an antagonist. The guy just wanted his stolen property returned. His art style is so good, though. The Quack is another villain who popped up over 4 separate episodes and the Scooby-Doo crossover movie. He's so delightfully over-the-top and wacky, with just enough sinisterness to keep him interesting. He'll try anything once to get rich. I talked about the villain of Everyone Wants to Direct a bit, but let's talk some more about this guy. Benton Tarantella is a zombie director with a confirmed body count, who just can't get past being a director. Like, you could just eat these people, but man believes in staying on script. He actually shows up again in Angry Nasty People, which is a commentary on how we treat famous people as commodities, as nothing more than their characters, and how show business will just eat actors up, while also showing how one can fall into being terrible when that's what's desired for you to be. Also, I cannot get over how ridiculously this guy is defeated both times. I can't not mention the antagonist of the House of Discontent. The spirit of the Harvest Moon appears at the farm, hunting the three and telling them to get out since they failed at farming. He's also a live-action giant floating head. I love it. I love when they put live-action things or people into the animation. It's such a good, surreal blend. Like the face of the tree in the Magic Tree of Nowhere. This guy always stuck with me. How delightfully creepy. You know a villain no one talks about but should? The Great Fusili. He's a puppeteer, he's creepy, his episode is so dark and unsettling. Also, he has possibly the most horrific fate of any antagonist. I also want to mention another antagonist who shows up in 2 episodes.
Man. Snowman.
I love this Sean Connery sounding guy. The first time he shows up is in The Snowman Cometh, where we find out he's the last of his kind due to global warming. That's right, there's subtle environmentalism in this episode. He wants to suck the thing out of humans that allows them to not melt when it gets hot, so he won't die out with the rest of his kind. In Snowman's Revenge, he's back, this time showing up at the farm and turning into a winter wonderland, while freezing Muriel and Eustace so they'll stay with him and he won't be alone. The Snowman is a surprisingly tragic figure, and you really feel bad for him and what he's been through. His people died out and he could do nothing to save them in time. Also, there was a Lady Snow person who, wowza, what a snow woman. There are a lot of great antagonists I could mention, like the Black Puddle Queen who awakened a lot of young prepubescent queers, or Big Bayou, a very gay snake, or the incredibly uncomfortable Conway the Contaminationist. Filthy fucker. I could go on all day, but I'll leave it here. Courage had so many funny, frightening, fantastic villains that kept kids watching. So much variety, too, from evil crops to quilters to the government. Some there were plays on classic monsters like the swamp monster or the wormhole. Some there were alien robots who just wanted to whittle little deer. Eustace's mom. Each was something to offer viewers. There really wasn't anything else like Courage the Cowardly Dog on TV at the time. In fact, there really hasn't been something like it since. Sure, it wasn't the first cartoon that played around with horror tropes. And there were other horror/spooky-themed cartoons like Beetlejuice or Ariel Monsters, but those definitely had different vibes. Courage never shied away from pushing the envelope of what they could show kids to terrify the crap out of them. Yes, there was plenty of humor, but it leaned heavily on absurdism that really gave Courage a different feel. It's really hard to think of any kids' cartoon in the same vein as Courage. Invader Zim got pretty dark at points and certainly employed absurdism for both humor and horror, but that played more on science fiction tropes. And the closest cartoon that came after is Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, the darkest iteration of the Scooby Gang to date, and incredibly good, but still much different vibes. Courage the Cowardly Dog is a show without true comparison, which is a shame. We need more scary cartoons for kids. We need more shows that introduce them to the macabre, the eerie, the uncomfortable. A show that helps them experience their fears in an environment they can understand, and that doesn't actually hurt them. Unless you count people who claim Courage traumatized them as kids. Which I don't, because that's not what's happening in most cases. We just saw something freaky as kids and it stuck with us, and we love it. That's not trauma. If you look online, though, there are so many people remembering and praising the dark nature of the show. It's on all sorts of lists, from scariest cartoons to best early yacht shows to, hey, did this exist or was it a fever dream? Please help me. We remember Courage for good reason, and hopefully one day people will stop being so weird about letting kids enjoy dark, scary things, and create a new show that will frighten the absolute hell out of a new generation. I think a big reason why we haven't seen anything else like Courage is because there's such a pushback on letting kids feel fear. We're afraid of what letting them be scared, even by something fake and ultimately harmless, will do to them. The late 90s and very early aughts was such a boom for kids' horror media. Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark, Scary Stories, Eerie Indiana, Ernest Scared Stupid, and yes, I'm just throwing that one out to see if anyone else watched the Ernest movies, okay? What I'm saying is, horror was a lot more accessible to kids. Now things feel more sanitized. Not to say there's been no kids' horror since then. Coraline the book, Coraline the movie, Goosebumps again. I mean, there's the Hotel Transylvania movies, which have monsters, but it's not scary. Oh, there was Paranorman. Over a decade ago. Yeah, kids don't have shit for modern horror media, which is just sad to me. Yes, I fully understand there are kids who can't handle anything spookier than It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, but there are kids that were like me when I was that age. I loved horror. I was fascinated by the macabre, by things that sent shivers down my spine and raised a hair on the back of my neck. I was enthralled with things that went bump in the night, of things that could be lurking in any shadow, watching, waiting. And back then, I had a media buffet to feast upon. Kids like that nowadays are left starving for scares and screams. It's tragic. If I can just dip my little non-existent toes into politics for a moment. We are currently in some very alarming times in regards to things like censorship. Well, in regards to a lot, but let's just talk about the censorship. Very conservative people are bringing back the satanic panic, hating any depiction of dark media, and certainly not wanting a whiff of it existing in children's media. And they want everything clean, tidy, unchallenging, vaguely Christian, overtly cisgender and heterosexual, white. You might say, but Fox, how can the very serious issues of conservatives' fear-mongering against queer people have anything to do with the horror genre? Because these people hate anything transgressive. You give an inch and they'll make laws banning trans people from public areas. Horror, by nature, is transgressive. Even kids' horror, especially kids' horror. These bigots hate queer people. Bigots hate anything that challenges their views, and horror can be really good at doing that. Horror can depict things like monsters or demons or unsettling imagery that rankles them. They don't like depictions of things that they view as evil, even if those things are depicted as bad. It merely being depicted is a sign that the creators are all monsters themselves. I don't know if I fully have a point here. Maybe if you're someone who goes, "This scary kids media traumatized me as a kid. I can't believe I was allowed to watch it." Reconsider saying that. Because why wouldn't you be allowed to watch it? It was a kids program, so it was shown to kids. Kids are allowed to watch things that freak them out. Too scary for one kid can be not scary enough for another. It's about knowing what you, or if you're a parent, what your child, is able to handle. And hey, maybe spend some time with the kid? Watch spooky age-appropriate shows together. If they get really freaked out, you can just talk to them about it. You don't need to claim that no kid should ever be subjected to the horrors of a purple dog getting into a food fight with Bigfoot. There are a lot of little things I could say about Courage, so I will, here. Spiders in the show look so rad. Rabbits too. In fact, I just really enjoy how animals are drawn in Courage. I really adore the backgrounds. They are beautiful and add so much to the overall atmosphere. There is a surprising amount of body horror in Courage. The foot fungus gangsters consuming Eustace, the chicken from outer space just ripping Eustace's head off and putting it in place of his own, the abject horror of your body being filled with alien DNA that changes it, and then being consumed by a disease that makes you harm yourself. All of Mondo's magic. Oh yeah, and Muriel being deboned. Zalost is queer-coded, and I'll die on this hill. Actually, there's a fair amount of queer-coding in this show. I'll climb that hill too and defend it with my life. The show actually delves into what made Eustace just an absolute bastard, and I really appreciate that. It's honestly heartbreaking. Still a piece of shit, though. Speaking of bastards, I love the computer. I love that he got his own episode. He was always delightfully sassy. The visual gags are so good, especially the ones where Courage is freaking out. Clam Eyes and the Standee are top tier. I also appreciate that even though Courage is mocked for being girly, the show doesn't treat Courage like he needs to get stronger or act tougher. He's allowed to be a sensitive little guy. I love how much Courage and Muriel adore each other. It's not a one-way street either. Muriel constantly stands up for Courage, shows him love, and even when an actual goddess tries to take him away, she fights to keep him. And I'm stopping here or else I go on for another 5,000 words. If you couldn't tell yet, I really enjoyed Courage the Cowardly Dog. It's so good even all these years later. The show is scary, it is silly, it is bizarre. It's a fascinating hook into the broader world of horror media. At the heart of Courage, however, is, well, heart. Courage loves the woman who rescued him as a pup and will do anything to protect Muriel, even, and often, putting his own life in danger instead. There are several times throughout the show where he even sets his own safety aside to help others who are lost or alone or cannot protect their own loved ones. He sees the good in people and the hurt they harbor, and he reaches out. Even if he owes them nothing, even if they've already attacked him in his home. Because Courage cares, and he wants to do what he can to heal that hurt inside of others. Much like Muriel eased his. Thanks for joining my lucid screaming.